Welcome everyone. My name is Tulsi Sundari Devidasi and I will be your facilitator today for this episode of 2024 16 Days of Activism for Safer Communities. And this is a campaign brought to you by the ISKCON Vaishnavi Ministry. And today we're joined by our wonderful speaker, Jidishakti Devidasi from London, who I've known for 17 years now, and I will introduce her shortly. This campaign is inspired by the UN 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, UNITE, Activism to End Violence Against Women and Girls. In his 7 purposes for ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada states, to bring the members of the society together with each other and nearer to Krishna, and thus to develop the idea within the members and humanity at large that each soul is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Based on this instruction, we feel inspired to build safe, healthy, and strong communities which can facilitate advancement in Bhakti. With this purpose in mind, through the 16 Days campaign, we aim to foster solution-based discussion on the role of leadership in fulfilling this vision. Today, with Chidishakti Mataji, we will be addressing the topic of leadership, the power to empower. So just introduce Chidishakti Devidasi now. She's been practicing and sharing Krishna consciousness for almost 30 years and is a disciple of His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. She lives in London, UK, and currently serves internationally as a preacher, mentor, and leader. She is a trustee and director at the Institute for Applied Spiritual Technology, aka IFAST, in Washington, D.C. She is also co-founder of Mindspace, a mental health screening service for devotees in the UK. She graduated from Imperial College as a medical doctor and specialized as a psychiatrist. She's been diagnosing and treating a wide range of mental health problems for over 20 years with medication, psychotherapy, nutrition, and Vedic teachings in an integrative, holistic model. She brings together 2 decades of experience in scientific advancements in mental health with Krishna consciousness and connects with a diverse audience. She broadcasts regularly on BBC Radio 4 and BBC World Service and is well known for her spiritual commentary on current affairs, mental health, and well-being, reaching an audience in the hundreds of millions. She also presented her own show for 3 years. She features on TV and in a number of newspapers and magazines and has contributed to several books. I think you should also write one. Before we continue, Chidishakti Prabhu, would you like to do the invocation? Thank you.
Thank you for the warm welcome. Om Gyan Timirandasya Yananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yata Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sarvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padhan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakambhitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa sindhubhyo cha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Okay, so welcome again to everyone. We want to help everyone listening to have a meaningful and practical understanding of certain phrases within our wonderful title, Leadership, the Power to Empower, so that you feel you can connect to abundant compassion, clarity, and the courage to thrive in your spiritual life and spread that to everyone you meet, your friends, your family, your colleagues, everyone. You know, let's be empowerment powerhouses. And so in opening this discussion, I'd be grateful, Jiddu Shakti Mataji, if you could help us understand some key phrases. So to start off with, what is the difference between power and empowerment, and how do we use power to empower?
So power is essentially, it's our ability or capacity to influence, to exert a force or an influence, right? So we all have, everybody has attributes and abilities that influence others. Some we exert consciously and some we exert unconsciously. You know, beauty is a power, speech is power, knowledge has an influence, right? All of these things, these would come under that definition of, you know, what power is. I guess it's the exertion of influence or force. Okay, it's a force if you look at it in terms of physics. And then if you look at empowerment, there is the extrinsic aspect and the intrinsic aspect of empowerment. Now, what do I mean by this? Empowerment is something that is facilitated for another person. So it's the drawing out of their ability, their attribute, and the force that exerts, or the influence that has. And that can be drawn out extrinsically. So outside forces, right? We can empower others by giving them facility, by giving them ideas, by empowering them with words, okay? Then there's the intrinsic empowerment, that which comes from within. And that's born of inspiration. It's born of nourishing the inner self, nourishing our divine self. So with power, it's referring more to attributes and the force that an attribute exerts. And empowerment is the ability or the act of either extrinsically or intrinsically bringing forth and facilitating people's abilities. And in the context of leadership, if you look at power and empowerment, a leader's power and whatever powers they have, again, the internal and external powers, are for the purpose, really, of giving people a vision and facility to empower them to bring out the best of their abilities in this world in the pursuit of their own Krishna consciousness.
Really nice points. Especially on how we're going from external to internal and then finding a way to integrate both, because then that's purposeful and practical. And yeah, I think it's a very personal process as well, because we all have different talents and skills, and for leaders to be able to spot that and engage that person according to what they, you know, want to do or can do, rather than putting people in boxes and, you know, working against their nature, which is something we can come to as well. So thank you. And also, I liked what you said about empowerment because I think that's really important. Just because we have power doesn't mean we're necessarily using it in the most effective
Absolutely.
way. Sometimes people use power to exploit. Some people, whether it's leaders or even the people that have it, can we use it to bring people together, create safer communities, like you said, where everyone's included?
And sometimes people have power that they don't use at all because they don't even recognize the power that they have.
Wow, that is really important. I read a study, NASA, they said when we're like 2 years old compared to like when we're 14, I think it was like we use 98% of our creativity, at that young age. And then it like by 14 years old or adulthood, it's down to 2%. So much untapped potential. And I think it's because of the barrage of social media and other people's expectations. And we almost seem to lose ourselves and our identities. And I think a leader can draw it out, like you said, like get us to believe, to get us to find our vision. They believe in our vision. I feel, you believe in me more than I do sometimes, I feel, when I speak to you. So, yeah, definitely. So, yeah, next on, what is Krishna conscious leadership?
Mm.
And how can we measure the success of a leader so that both now and in growing the future of leadership in Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON society, we can develop relationships and communities that are healthy, happy, and in harmony with, Srila Prabhupada's purpose in setting up the society, which we mentioned earlier about coming closer to Krishna ourselves, with each other, and sharing that with the world.
So, what is Krishna conscious leadership? If we come back to the definition of leadership being about setting a vision and bringing people with you to not just understand and see that vision, but achieve that vision using their individual talents and powers themselves. What sets Krishna conscious leadership aside from just regular, technical understandings of leadership is that it's divinely inspired.
Hmm.
So what does this mean? Right? What does a divinely inspired, how is a divinely inspired monarch different? Or how is a divinely inspired leader different? However big or small their constituency is, how is that divine inspiration? How does that manifest differently? How is it sought differently? What do they do differently? Okay. So I think one thing we have to come back to is Krishna conscious leadership is underpinned by this definition of divinely inspired, meaning that it has its roots in Krishna consciousness.
Hmm.
So we look at Srila Prabhupada's instructions, advice, and desires for for leaders and for everybody in our movement is that whatever we do should be divinely inspired. Whether we're milking the cows, it should be divinely inspired. Whether we're mothers, it should be divinely inspired. Or if we've got a leadership role, it should be divinely inspired. And that means for something to be inspired divinely, we have to connect with the divine.
Hmm.
And our ways of connecting with the divine, especially for a divinely inspired leader, they've got to be following scriptural authority on some level.
Hmm.
Okay, there's got to be, it can't just sit at what is needed for time, place, and circumstance. That time, place, and circumstance activities got to be rooted in following scriptural authority. Divinely inspired leaders also have spiritual advisors. They should have seniors, mentors, shiksha gurus, diksha gurus that they take shelter of, that inspire them divinely, because no one is ever too senior in position or in their Krishna consciousness to not need guidance.
Hmm.
You know,
Agree. Yeah.
when are we, ever too mature to not grow?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We actually, if you look at the most advanced devotees, including Srila Prabhupada being our Jagat Guru, he was still learning as he was writing his books because he was still turning to the acharyas to draw on what they'd said. He didn't just rely entirely on his, oh no, this is what his purports are not, this is what I think, this is what I think, this is. It's full of Jiva Goswami says this, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says this,
Mm.
the Guru Maharaj says this. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So So the first thing is their leadership is divinely inspired because they're constantly connecting with divinity. First of all, their leadership is underpinned by scriptural authority, but in their day-to-day life, they also have their own spiritual advisors, okay? And they also connect with previously divinely inspired leaders, okay? So those both living and those who maybe have left. So, our scripture's full of the pastimes and teachings of divinely inspired leaders. You look at Bhishma Dev, okay? He's like the grandfather of leadership. And, we find his teachings in the Manu Samhita. We find his teachings also in the Srimad Bhagavatam when he's instructing the assembled devotees on the battlefield of Kurukshetra for 7 days. Many of his instructions are to Yudhishthira about how to be more divinely inspired in his leadership and his monarchy. So these three things are really important attributes. And then ultimately, what does this all culminate in? What is the purpose of divinely inspired leadership? Is ultimately it transforms the leader into having this mood of servant leadership, that I am at your service. And this brings up this question that no one is ever too senior to not serve. In fact, the mood of the spiritual world is, am I senior enough to serve? Because seniority in a spiritual sense means servant of the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant, right? That's our highest accolade. The greatest devotee is the person who is free of envy and in this mood of, I am at your service. And so we should be thinking, am I even qualified to serve? So this is the divinely inspired servant leader is so nourished internally that whatever power or empowerment they've been given externally and internally is rooted in something that is very stable and deep-rooted historically and across dimensions. So across time and space.
Yeah. It is drawing upon a multitude of sources from that one divine source. And, to summarize what you said, it's Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Guru is spiritual teachers, and then we have spiritual people and spiritual texts. So these three really underpin. And then I like that you added servant leadership, because it reminded me one time someone asked Srila Prabhupada that, are you God? And he said, no, I'm the servant of God. And then he was so humble. He said, actually, I'm trying to be the servant of God. Because in this world, if you go around and say, oh, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a servant. Like, people are going to think, oh, that's a low thing. But the flip side, material and spiritual dynamics are opposite, because that's the highest thing in the spiritual world. And you're right. It's something which requires a qualification of humility and so many other things. And I liked this phrase you said, divinely inspired, because I think, at least for me growing up, like I remember when I got 3 A's for my A level, I thought, wow, that was me, I'm amazing. And then when I read the Gita and Krishna says, I'm the ability in man, I'm like, oh, that was you, and then it's sort of like, can we be humble enough to realize that actually all our power, gifts, and everything comes from Krishna. And so we need to keep that connection. And then use it to serve in this world, not to grow our egos like, I was doing at the time. But thank you, Bhagavad Gita and Prabhupada, for introducing me to the Gita by writing it in English.
So Krishna conscious leaders are channels for Krishna's mercy. We're all channels for Krishna's mercy. Some are bigger than others, but how big of a channel someone is for Krishna's mercy is not dependent on their position, but really dependent on how divinely inspired they are. And that means how connected they are to divinity.
Yes, I heard once that leadership is not a position, it's a state of consciousness. And so it's, that qualification is beyond the official position. Okay. Srila Prabhupada made this statement that 50% of my work is not finished, referring to the fact that he had not implemented Daivi Varnashram, which is Krishna's original system to promote inclusion and diversity. But Tirtha Maharaj made this statement that managers use people to make things happen, but leaders are empowered to make things happen for the people. You know, perhaps some of you listening now can think, how have you felt sometimes controlled by a manager in this context? And who are the people that have that same power in your life, but they inspire you and make you a better person and version of yourself? That's the difference. So how can leaders inspire people to serve according to their talents, skills, and strengths and limitations within Daivi Varnashram, and at the same time keep the higher goal of Krishna consciousness, you know, in view?
Okay, so you asked me a few questions in one. So I mean,
Yes.
with Devi Varnashram, I think it's really important to understand that when Srila Prabhupada was referring to Devi Varnashram, what he's really referring to is what Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, that one's service in this world, their varna, okay, their contribution in terms of their occupation. What does occupation mean? It's what we spend most of our time occupied doing, right?
Yeah.
What's our contribution to society is based on, as Krishna says, our guna, okay, our qualities, okay, and our karma, our activities or training, not by birthright. And Prabhupada was very strong on wanting to ensure that we develop a community where this becomes more organic, because we live in a world where, alongside the whole, I mean, part of the reason why the caste system was developed in this skewed way, where your occupations based on birth, or your value in society is based on your birth, or your contribution in societies or position in society is based on birth rather than your training and your qualities, is because this value of contribution's been minimized and replaced with status.
Yeah. So
And
bringing back
so
meritocracy, I think that's what they call it today,
absolutely,
isn't it?
absolutely.
Yeah, where you get something or a role based on your hard work, your qualifications internally and externally, not just because you're, you know, have this money or power, or because the person before you is your father or connection or whatever it is. And
exactly.
yeah,
We don't want nepotism. We want people who are qualified and have the skills and interest and inclination and natural talent and to do those things. So the reason Prabhupada, one of the reasons Prabhupada emphasizes this so much is because this the caste system, or having people's varna allocated according to birth, doesn't really improve how people contribute to society. What it just creates is a hierarchy and a system of valuing people based on very superficial things. And it's very removed from being divinely inspired. It's not divinely inspired. It's a very superficial value system. And what it means is that only a few attributes and a few rungs of varna are very valued and others are not. And what this ends up meaning is people become inauthentic. They end up having to live in ways that are not natural to them. So, and we know that when something or someone works according to their nature, is occupied according to their nature. I don't mean work as in is remunerated, right? Or remunerated. I mean works as in they occupy their time, their body, their mind in a way that is natural to them. It's far more sustainable and it gives the person health rather than depletes it. Okay, it almost nourishes it, almost strengthens it. Actually, you know, it's one of the best books I've read recently on understanding Varnashram is by Urmila Devi, called Career Dharma. It's a very, very, I mean, if anybody's interested, it's a very comprehensive and practical look at understanding our Varna and how it manifests in this world and how it can be expressed in this world. But sorry, coming back to your point about how can leaders help, how can divinely inspired Krishna conscious leaders help Vaishnavas, people in our community, to work within this context of Devi Varnashram, is to move away from this model of emergency engaging people in an emergency way where they're constantly having to just do what's needed and work in a much more planned way. So whether that's when a project is started, it's not just started with who's available, but actually take a bit more time and consideration over putting the right people in the right roles. It's good for their physical and psychological health as well as their spiritual health, because a happy mind and body gives you much greater breathing space for practicing your Krishna consciousness. Make more planning as projects change in terms of succession planning as people's lives change, and creating less situations where we are always in a constant state of emergency needing resources by not spending so much time on expanding, but actually spending more time on boiling the milk. So taking care of those who are existing, taking care of the projects that are already existing, the people that are already existing, rather than constantly looking for new projects and new people. Because if we're constantly in a state of looking for new projects and new people, or making new projects and making new members, then there'll always be, the people who are already existing need to work in an emergency state rather than in a planned, considered state. And then this will also feed then through into our internal and external education system, into our family lives. Because one thing that's happened is, and this is a product of modern society, is people have been so preoccupied by their occupation being a means for income that they are having to push away what their nature and their training is. And a similar thing is then mirrored in our community, because we bring this in and we don't change it by really looking at what divinely inspired leadership is, which is also to follow Krishna's Devi Varnashram system. So we plan our services like that. We are not in an emergency situation any longer in our community where we're trying to set up and establish roots. But if we mushroom and the foundation is narrower than the expanse, then it will topple.
Wow, I love that analogy of the mushroom. You know, if the people we have here within this community of devotees is very thin and sparse and not looked well after, and then like we want to grow into this mushroom, then yeah, but what is it standing on your right? It will topple over. That's a beautiful visual for everyone. Perhaps you can remember that. And I just like to get everyone to stop and pause, even get out a piece of pencil and paper and, you know, write down, like, do you feel like you're serving within your natural, the three words popped out when you were speaking to me, that when we're situated in our, you know, work in a way that is natural, authentic, and sustainable, that is healthy, as opposed to emergency, just do this because I'm your manager or whatever, and someone needs to do it. And meanwhile, I was, you know, studying dentistry, and this is before I was, you know, came to the path of Bhakti, but my parents wanted the best for me. They wanted me to have a, you know, stable income, and all these things are important, and they did it out of love. But that's not my nature. You know, that is not my nature at all. My nature is to, you know, I've discovered it by reading Srila Prabhupada's book. I like reading and studying and writing, and I want to be more creative. I was always so sciencey. So, you know, it's incredible what can happen when I think emergency and planning means that we need to stop, pause, and think. You know, we need to create that space for ourselves, you know, if we're leaders, then with the people that we're leading. And we need to kind of not be so mode of passion, as Krishna speaks about in the Gita, and be more reflective and think, okay, is this actually working? Are you happy doing that service? What do you think about it? And if someone might be saying, oh, I'm glad you asked, because for the last 6 months, this has been you know, do we even know that people don't like what they're doing? Sometimes they do it out of obedience. Okay, I've got to be good. Someone told me to do this, and it's needed. And can we encourage conversation and openness?
You know, on this point of leaders inspiring others to work according to their nature, there is definitely the practical side of it. But there's also as leaders, you know, a servant leader loves their people, actually cares about those people.
Yes.
People who are impersonal don't make very good servant leaders, because there's not a person they're serving, because they're impersonal. There's not a people that they're serving, right? They'll get very much caught up in the technicalities of the role rather than who the role is set up for. Any leadership role is set up for the people, right? It's not
Mm.
really, I mean, if it's set up just for the, nuts and bolts, that's a manager, right? And managers are necessary, and there are many managers, and we need managers and we need administrators, but actually managers need to be led by leaders who are Kshatriyas and leaders who are Brahmins. And that's really really important, because a big part of servant leadership is caring for people. This brings me to a point that in the fourth canto, 16th chapter of the Bhagavatam, where Vedic reciters are describing Maharaj Prithu's glories.
Mm-hmm.
They say that the king will respect all women as if they were his own mother, and he will treat his own wife as the other half of his body. He will be just like an affectionate father to his citizens, and he will treat himself as the most obedient servant of the devotees who always preach the glories of the Lord. So there's a lot of care. That verse is completely about that this leader will care for the people. Whether they're women, whether they're Krishna conscious, whether they're just ordinary citizens, whether it's his own wife, doesn't matter. Whoever surrounds him, there's going to be deep care coming from that leader. And that actually underpins even healthy Devi Varnashram. That comes from a place of care. The Brahmins care, the Kshatriyas care, the Vaishyas care, the Shudras care. They all care for each other. And that means valuing each person's contribution. Because, if you look at Shudras as the legs, you look at Vaishyas as the digestive system, you look at Kshatriyas as the arms, and you look at Brahmins as the heads. A body gets nowhere without the ability to think and look. Right? It's not going to move. The legs won't know where to go. Okay. Yeah. And you look at a body without arms, it can't distribute, it can't protect. A body without a stomach can't intake, digest, and send nutrients throughout the body, and a body without legs can't move.
Yeah.
Right. So we need all four. And this is the thing with Devi Varnashram, when a divinely inspired leader understands that Devi Varnashram is underpinned by recognizing and giving facility to people's different natures and training and engaging them in that way, then it makes for a happy worldly life as well as a happy spiritual life. Because ultimately, a divinely inspired monarch, their ultimate vision is, how can I set up society in such a way that people's number one priority, which is their relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, with each other and people outside of this community, can be facilitated, which is exactly that,
the purpose of
purpose,
Prabhupada,
third purpose of
beginning,
Srila Prabhupada for ISKCON. So I think it's really important. And this point of Varnashram, we can have a whole nother conversation about it.
Yeah.
But I'm conscious we're focusing on
We'd be
leadership,
happy to have you share it with us.
I'm going to stop.
I hope we'll have many more conversations like this. But just to say on this point of how leaders, I was getting a sense of this unity and diversity when you're describing the body, different parts of the body. The caste system has become something to exploit, but originally this cooperation and collaboration between the different parts, and no one thinking this one's better, but that we are all interdependent. Can we coexist, work together? And it's just, a small example, but it really does prove and show to be true. I mean, I come to your spiritual warrior sanghas. I really appreciate coming to your Bhagavatam sangha as well. And I notice how a lot of us, we're thinking about something from different perspectives. And you do this magical thing where you bring everything together and make everyone's point kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Cumulative. Like what we had on our own was nice, it was good, but the synergy that you bring it to, because you see that Krishna's coming through everyone. Let's not make anyone feel like, and I also appreciate that you challenge us, and if something's not right in a way that doesn't reduce our dignity, you merely clarify the point so that for our better understanding. And so I think a leader needs to be able to do all of that. It's not about being sentimental and saying, yeah, let's just include you for the sake of it, even if you're not speaking the right thing or whatever, but clarifying if needed. But if someone is genuinely making a valid point, I see sometimes people, oh, well, what do you know? They can dismiss people just artificially and superficially or for an unfair reason. And I really feel I feel what you've just said, I feel like you do live it in when I'm just reflecting on
Okay,
that
but this isn't
experience.
about me, so let's move on.
But just to say, it's one thing to talk about these things theoretically, but I think we all feel it. So thank you
You're
for
very,
that.
you're very kind. You're very kind.
And moving on to this thing about care that you said as well, it leads nicely actually into the next section, which is about how caring Srila Prabhupada is. Because I was remembering, Prabhupada's every thought, word, and action was always so exemplary. And there was this one time where he was like towards the end stages of his life. He was very ill, emaciated, weak, and literally had to be carried by, devotees on all four corners on a palanquin. And one time, someone that was carrying him just let out a really loud cry. And, everyone was alarmed. And Prabhupada is, asking, what is wrong? What's happened? And this devotee's like, okay, my issues are tiny, nothing compared to what Prabhupada's going through right now. So he's like, nothing, Prabhupada, it's fine. But Prabhupada was persistent. Why? Because of that precise point you just made, Jiddi Shakti. He was a leader who cared,
Mm.
And so he discovered this, he was relentless in his love, and the devotee was defeated by his love and had to give in and explain that he had this boil on his foot, an abscess oozing pus and whatever else. Sorry if it's a bit gory, guys. But Prabhupada, he wasn't just caring, but he was competent. He gave like a herbal remedy with herbs and spices, turmeric, etc. And that devotee, applied that dressing every day, and Prabhupada would check in every day until it was fully healed. So much
Mm.
personal care and attention, even when he had every reason to be like, look, I've got my own stuff going on, But because he was divinely empowered and inspired, he had that strength to be able to care for others, not artificially, So could you comment something on how can we follow in Srila Prabhupada's footsteps, and emulate him without imitating?
Well, you've answered your own question. We seek to emulate, right, rather than imitate. This is what following means. All too often we get caught up in a very rudimentary type of following, which is to copy or to imitate. We look at the superficial action and we try and copy that, which is it's an infant stage of learning. And it's funny, we often, so even the word infant might sound a bit patronizing, or it's, hopefully it's not offending anyone, but really it's about looking at our level of maturation in different areas of our life. So just like when we were small children, we learn a lot of the things we learned initially by copying our parents, right?
Mm.
And then that copying got more refined into actually understanding why we were doing the things we were doing. And then as we mature further, we refine those things to suit our ability and
Mm.
our nature and our kind of body, even something as simple as eating. Okay.
Mm.
So a similar thing can happen. We go through different stages in our different services. We go through different stages in our devotional life. We go through different stages, even as taking a leadership role, and it can be, it's a normal stage that when people are in the early stages of leadership, they may learn primarily by modeling and copying. But the thing is, this is why doing services which are not so much in our nature, or which we don't have training for, can be dangerous, because one can then easily be misled as to who they are imitating and copying. Do you see what I mean? So it is important, I think, that we, in terms of following the footsteps of, it means we emulate. So actually, if we want to emulate Srila Prabhupada, we should study him. Study
Mm.
him as a devotee and study him as a leader. Okay, so if we're going to study Srila Prabhupada's leadership style, that is what we study. How did he lead? If we then, because he was such a multifaceted, amazing, wonderful, multi-talented person. He single-handedly started this movement. He was the leader, the servant, the cook, the cleaner, the speaker, the everything. He was everything, the garland maker. He did everything first himself.
Jack of all trades and master of all.
Master of all trades, exactly. Jack and master of all trades, exactly. And so it's important that we don't get mixed up when we are looking at Srila Prabhupada as a person, because there'll be one way he behaves as someone's Diksha guru, then as a business aspect of the leadership, right? Then in terms of leadership, like as a father. Do you see what I mean? As in like a fatherly way. So we should study Srila Prabhupada and not try and just cross over, okay, in this context, he was like this. So that means that applies to every place. That's one thing. So first is in emulation, studying a person is very, very important. Or studying the person you are aspiring to become like is very important.
And having the context, like you said, so time, place, and circumstance, we have to use our own intelligence to see which aspect of his leadership is relevant for me to imbibe and apply in our own situation.
Then the other thing is following the guidance consistently. So not just, first of all, we don't want to just cherry pick what we want to emulate, but what we're trying to emulate, try and do that consistently rather than, oh, 1 week I'm going to emulate this, another week I'm going to emulate that. Otherwise, we'll just find ourselves running from pillar to post. So pick one thing, stick with it consistently. When that's developed, then you can move on to the next thing. I mean, that's how Srila Prabhupada grew the movement. That's how he grew our community. This is somebody who came to the West with a small bag of grains, very, very little money, and no address to settle in. He was, he was basically living under a bridge doing his preaching. Okay. And it's not like somebody had given him a center to set up in or anything like that. And he went from that to having, 108 temples, traveling around the globe 14 times in 12 years. And when he was, this intrigued business people. And they would interview him and they'd ask him, not because they wanted to know how to become transcendental, but they wanted to know, wow, he's so successful. I wonder how he did it. And when they asked him, how did you do it? How did you go from zero to having all this opulence? And Prabhupada said, I went one person at a time. Because he was patient. Like we were talking about, he loved the people. It doesn't matter if it was one person he was looking after or 5,000. He loved everyone. And so he went one person at a time. And so in following him consistently, his guidance consistently, I think it's important we keep things simple for ourselves. We take one thing, we do it well before we move on to the next one. And last but not least, how do we emulate him? It's important to stay grateful for what he's given us. Otherwise, what can happen is our false egos are very strong. And before we know it, the mind can start to dismiss what Srila Prabhupada's given us and rely too much on our own idea of what is good leadership or what is a good way to do things. Because ultimately, on some level, we are all governing or responsible for something and someone. So yeah, just wanted to share those few points on how we emulate or follow in the footsteps of.
That's great. Yeah. So studying Srila Prabhupada and being consistent with application and building it up slowly, not trying to do everything at one time. Thank you. And then looking at like an example from our sacred text, Bali Maharaj, a king, actually rejected his guru, Shukracharya, because he told him not to serve Krishna. So how can people who follow leaders do so with wisdom and use their own critical, independent thinking so that they can be discerning and not just blindly follow people who may be leading them to make poor choices, which are not in their best interest?
I think no one is ever fully blind. All of us, when we follow something or someone, we're just varying degrees of blinkered. And usually what's blinkering us is our secondary motives. So, yes, of course, there is accountability towards the leader in terms of misusing their power or misleading people using their power for their own secondary motives.
Mm.
And what I'm going to say next might be a hard pill for some people to swallow, especially if you've been hurt or exploited. But we also have to be conscious of our secondary motives, because we will often allow a lot of nonsense to go on and blinker ourselves to it because we are gaining something else from it.
Mm.
And it's usually we're gaining something that maintains something even in our own transient identity, which is really probably not healthy for our Krishna consciousness, but keeps us in good standing in this world, even in our community. Because remember, there's our identity as a devotee in this world. How much do people see us as a devotee? How much validation do we get for being a devotee? How much do we think we're a devotee? And we often rely on whether other people think we're a devotee and how much we believe what they tell us, versus actually being devoted.
Mm.
And yeah, so where our to the degree that we are invested in our secondary motives, to that degree they will blinker us and not only be misled, more vulnerable to being misled, but they're not being open to solutions to help things move forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it's this is about empowerment. So I think what I'm really getting from your answer here is we need to take responsibility for empowering ourselves. And that means we need to see, what do I really want? And if I know what I really want, then we will be able to tell this leader doesn't align with that. So let me not go for the secondary benefits and gains I'm getting and just, respectfully, politely, intelligently move away so that we can keep growing that purity, which is, what we want to be aiming for ultimately. So thank you for
Absolutely.
that.
I mean, when Srila Prabhupada teaches us about how do you know which guru to pick, right? And whose teachings to follow, he always says, look at where what's the direction that the leader's taking you to? What's the destination? If that's not your destination, that's not what you follow then. Right?
Yeah,
Don't follow a person who's taking you to a destination that you don't want to go to.
true.
Right.
And I
So
think,
there is definitely some accountability on our part. So when Bali Maharaj is told by Shukracharya, and by etiquette, right, by Maryada, by etiquette, he should follow his guru. But his guru is giving him a principle that's lower than the principle of this is the supreme person. His guru is telling him that's the supreme personality of Godhead. Don't listen to him because he will take away everything. Now, Bali Maharaj thinks, hang on a minute, if this is the supreme personality of Godhead, then even him taking away everything is more glorious than keeping everything myself, right? So he doesn't listen to Shukracharya because the higher principle is to please the supreme personality of Godhead. And that's higher than even, listening to the family guru about who's actually focused on making sure you retain your wealth and riches. Remember, we have different types of gurus, and Shukracharya wasn't there as Bali Maharaj's guru to help him surrender to Vishnu. He was there to try and help him keep his opulence. His
material position, status, gains.
Absolutely. So
do we want material gains and staying in this world, or do we want to leave this world? And we should choose our teachers in alignment with that. So it's down to what we want. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for some people, and again, sorry to be so blunt, for many people, a career in ISKCON equals being Krishna conscious. Emphasis then becomes on that rather than taking the time and space out to see, is what I'm doing helping me become more devoted to Krishna?
Yeah, it is an inner journey beyond externals, whether that's in an organization, whether that's in the material world. So yeah, thank you. I want to address the topic of integrity and leaders being trustworthy, because we often see hypocrisy and duplicity in world leaders, and that makes us lose faith in leaders. I'm sure many people listening can relate to this. And then, I've definitely thought this parts of my journey, that what's the point of even approaching leaders? Why don't I just try and empower myself? Why do I need a guru or a guide or a mentor if so many are uninspiring? And there's this quote that the world doesn't need more people to teach how to live. The world needs more people who live what they teach. You know, but in the absence of such teachers, I mean, Sanatana Goswami said to Haridas Thakur that you are incredible. This is Antya Lila, chapter 4, text 102 to 3, because he says you perform both duties in relation to the holy name by your personal behavior and by your preaching and sharing with others. So people can often put leaders on a pedestal and they feel crushed when leaders say or do things in a way that are not inspiring or abusive or exploitive, or in ways that they feel is wrong or uninspiring. So how can people listening, you know, who have felt let down, abused fairly or unfairly by those in leadership, heal and learn to trust leaders again?
I mean, you've presented a spectrum there. Feeling let down is a universal experience, and feeling let down is often a mismatch of expectation and reciprocation.
Mm.
When we've felt let down, and it's quite frankly, there's not an imbalance of power in the sense that there's been no real exploitation. It's more a matter of opinion. Then I think each individual is, you know, we've got to be accountable to ourselves as well and for ourselves, that, you know, how much of my feeling let down is to do with unrealistic expectations? Because we have, when we're not clear on what our leaders are there for, we can have unrealistic expectations. Just look at gurus and the biggest pressures on Diksha gurus, but this pressure often falls on Shiksha gurus and mentors as well. People will often seek to have their social and human needs met, and forget that actually those personalities are serving more to help people with their spiritual needs. And that, you know, they're not there to be their financial advisor or, you know, doctor or psychotherapist, or, do you see what I mean? Or best friend, that they're there to really, yes, those things may become part of or have some influence, but
Part, like
not,
you said,
yes,
though,
part, it's not
but
underpinning.
not the most important thing.
The most important, exactly. So, you know, I think each of us have to first ask ourselves, if this is I felt let down, where were my expectations unrealistic? What was I seeking from here that really isn't the remit of this particular relationship or this person's job, to be honest, you know?
Yes, I've heard someone say, you know, when we go to a hardware store for milk, that's a mismatch, you know?
Exactly. It's a clear mismatch, right? But then you've got the actual abuse where somebody's exploited their position to maybe gain something from us unfairly, or withheld something, or betrayed. You know, there's so many different types of abuse. And see, the problem with this is that when people are let down by others or abused by others before they take to spiritual life or take shelter of a spiritual community, or take to getting to know Krishna or God better, when people are abused or let down in those situations, they turn to God. All right, fine, the rest of the world has let me down, let me turn to God. But when the representatives of God abuse and exploit, then people feel lost, because, like, well, if the representatives of God have let me down, then who do I go to? Because the buck stops with Krishna. So this is where, again, we have to come back to the person who's the leader is representing. They are not equal to. This is why Prabhupada was very strong on this. The only time he ever asked anyone to leave, and that was only a suspension, he had them come back after a year, is when they were propagating that he is Krishna, because he didn't want this poison to spread.
No.
No one is Krishna but Krishna. It doesn't matter even if they're a Nitya Siddha, they're not Krishna. It doesn't matter if you hold your guru or the leadership in the highest regard, they're not going to ever be able to fulfill you the way Krishna does. So we have to go back to, okay, what is this person representing? And if this person is exploiting and abusing, they're no longer representing Krishna or Krishna-like behavior.
Yes.
That doesn't mean I have to disconnect from who they're representing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So that's really important in our healing journey, because there is a difference between the principle of leadership or the principle of guru versus the person guru and the person who's the leader. Right? And the reason I'm talking about guruship and leadership is we often get caught up in similar dynamics, that people will lose sight of what the person represents and get caught up in the person very much. And so when there's a problem with the person, they then throw the baby out with the bathwater, that they'll often let go of the process and their relationship with Krishna as well, when there's no need to.
Thank you. That's really clarified it. So let's, if any of us feel, or if it's happened to us, if we focus on the principle and the process, you know, there's that, was it trust the process? I have a poster on my wall. It just, funny enough, I looked at it this morning. So I hope that helps anyone in that situation to, again, find representatives, channels, as you mentioned earlier, for that divine, you know, inspiration to come through, and not give up that just because one person has hurt me and not loved me, that doesn't mean that you can't find other people who can open up, you know, that channel and connection to the divine for you again. And we never lose connection with Krishna anytime. He's a leader who is constantly, consistently, unbreakably, one of his names is Achutya. He's infallible. Others can fall, but he can't fall. So please remember that, you know, Krishna is there for us as the ultimate leader as well.
But we have to do our part. We then seek out. It's just like, you know, every charging cable can carry a current, but it's got to be plugged into the electricity source. Now, if a cable becomes frayed, if we're super attached to the cable, we're going to cry, oh, that was my favorite cable. But we don't go, I've lost faith that there's no electricity. We simply change the cable. Now, of course, a cable is not the same as having faith in a person. But this analogy, hopefully, just to remind people that Krishna's love for us is unbreakable, it's unshakable, and it is uninterrupted. The reason that pure devotional service is uninterrupted, okay, unmotivated, is pure, right, and favorable to Krishna is because that is exactly the way he loves us. Uninterrupted, unmotivated, and favorable to us. So really pure devotional service then stands to reason that is an exact reciprocation of what he's doing for us and the way he loves us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving us hope. So in order for leaders to avoid falling down, you know, from this place of goodness and that they're getting from Krishna and channeling to others, you know, how can they balance looking after their own being and well-being and growth to sustain, you know, their leadership and being this channel of love, compassion, service, servant leader, especially for, you know, the people that do look up to them as leaders? How can they, you know, maintain that?
You know, Prabhupada's formula of health, sadhana, and service, that wasn't just for some people, it's for everybody. And ultimately, every leader is a follower. Prabhupada often say that, you know, the best gurus are the best disciples.
Yeah.
Right? And so the best leaders are the best followers.
Yeah.
And so they follow, again, this in terms of this model of divinely inspired leadership, is that they are mindful that their own spiritual life, their health, and their sadhana and service are aligned, and that their health and sadhana is looked after. And health is more than an absence of disease. Okay, just because a body isn't diseased, it doesn't mean it's healthy. Just because the mind doesn't have an obvious disease doesn't mean it's healthy. And just because our spiritual life isn't showing signs of disease, it doesn't mean it's entirely healthy. So being healthy means actually, just like Prabhupada said, scrutinizingly study scripture. We should be a bit scrutinizing about our health. We should be planning, right? Okay, I know in time, I might not be able to rely on genetics in terms of my bone health or my clarity of thought. What can I do to prepare for the future? I know that. Do you see what I mean? So there's this, leaders need to have foresight for their people, but they also need to have foresight for themselves, right? You look at Yudhishthira Maharaj. He led the world, governed the world for a very long time. But then he was also simultaneously preparing for when he would put all of that away and focus entirely on his own spiritual life. So how can leaders balance and look after their own well-being and the well-being of the people they lead? they must ensure that they take the time out to do that. And that in itself will set an example.
Yes.
Person's cleanliness is, the fragrance of a person's cleanliness, or a person's cleanliness is actually apparent in their fragrance. They may come and dress well, but if they haven't bathed, you can smell it, right?
Yeah.
So someone can put front of being spiritually strong, but their spiritual strength is a fragrance that they carry and is apparent, something we pick up on, right? We may love leaders who get a lot done, but if we see that they have little self-love or love for others, and usually people who have little self-love find it hard to love other people, right? What they do doesn't amount to so much, and it doesn't have so much impact in people's Krishna conscious development. It may even get people facility, but it doesn't really help their Krishna consciousness so much. So yeah, whether you are an emerging leader or you are a leader, look after yourself, and you will find that it will be much easier to look after other people. But also as people, as followers, I think we should allow our leaders to have space to do that and not expect them to be bionic. We shouldn't expect that if somebody's an advanced soul, that they have no needs.
Yeah, completely agree.
I think that is an unrealistic, unhelpful expectation, because then that means we are putting the same expectation on ourselves that, as I spiritually advance, that means I'll need less and less and less and less. Needing less is not a sign of spiritual advancement. The sign of acid test of spiritual advancement is increased taste.
Yeah, and we need space for that. So I remember someone saying to me once that Bhakti Maharaj just asked about his schedule, and he said, "Today my service is to rest."
Yes. We were out.
I told someone that was quite new to this process, and she was like, "Wow, I love that. I'm writing that down." Because we live in a world where we feel like we have to be constantly switched on and competing and growing and showing some massive, that's not like, if we're depleting ourselves and losing ourselves, our physical health, our mental health, it's not worth it, that burnout and that overwhelm, and trying to put up a front. Like you said, that stench of lack of self-care is going to show through the facade and the front that people are putting on, so we are who we are when no one's looking, and our public self and our private self, actually, I remember you saying this, that what we do in our private time has much more impact than what people may officially see. So thank you for that.
It's the subtle, I mean, that example you brought up of Marge, that actually, I was there when that happened.
Wow.
It was in Amsterdam, and Marge had injured his leg. Now, Marge is a very active person, internally and externally very, very active. And so for him to have a leg injury and slow down wasn't going to be a naturally easy thing to do. And it was very telling, because as is kind of people's perception also that they impose on leaders, is that you should always be doing something. So I remember after a class, somebody was making polite conversation and came to him, so Marge, what service are you up to these days? And Marge very politely said, "Oh, my service at the moment is to heal because I've injured my leg." Really just teaching this person that self-care in the service of others is actually selfless.
Wow. Looking after ourselves so that we can serve and give more, that is leadership. Okay, wow, everyone, please make sure you write that one down. Thank you, Julie Shanti, and thank you, Bhakti Maharaj. So if a leader does not know something, or they says, "I can't take responsibility," is that bad? I think we've covered that, actually, because in that example and story that you just shared, leaders have limits. That doesn't mean that they're not advanced, because like you said, it's about taste. Is there anything you wanted to add on this point about leaders having limitations? Is it a bad
someone being a leader? So I just want to clarify something. Just someone being a leader doesn't equal that they're spiritually advanced. Okay, and not all spiritually advanced people become leaders. But leadership is there's the role side of leadership, and then there's the natural kind of
leading by example.
Leading by example, exactly. So I think, first of all, I really do want to make sure that that point is put across again, because we don't want to create, again, another dialogue that, okay, when people have a position that equals spiritual advancement. I mean, it's wonderful if we have, what we want is divinely inspired leaders who are spiritually advanced and good at the service that they do. Equally, we want divinely inspired Vaishyas, we want divinely inspired Shudras, we want divinely inspired Kshatriyas, we want divinely inspired Brahmins, we want divinely inspired every Varna, we want divinely inspired mothers, children, you know, everything.
Yeah.
Everything needs that transcendental touch. So coming back to this, if a leader doesn't know something, I mean, isn't it unrealistic to expect anyone to know everything? Even Prabhupada made mistakes, but because his mistakes were also divinely inspired, ultimately they served a higher purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, we are not Krishna. You know, Prabhupada is not Krishna. We made that distinction earlier. Someone asked
And
Prabhupada.
neither are our leaders. They are not Krishna.
They're
So
not.
actually, if they don't know something, it's not about bad or good. It's about, is this a leader that I can trust that when they don't know something, they're willing to go and find it out? And
Yeah.
also, should they know what I've asked them? Is it even anything which is in their jurisdiction?
Or
Again, have I
even
got
relevant.
unrealistic expectations?
Yeah, once someone asked Srila Prabhupada, you know, if you're so knowledgeable, whatever, do you know how many windows there are on this building, this huge building? And he was like, how many windows are there in a mirage in the desert? You know, sometimes people just want to poke at people and find fault and criticize rather than seeing what is the good work this person is doing according to whatever Krishna is inspiring them to do. And Prabhupada is definitely divinely inspired. So, yeah, thank you for making that point. So, ending this amazing conversation that we've had today, we really hope that everyone is able to take something away that is relevant to you on your journey right now. Please pen that down, listen a second time if helpful. Everyone is a leader. There's a statement. Everyone is a leader. So how can we understand this statement, especially where we may not, or you know, people listening may not be so inclined towards leadership?
Everyone is a leader. You know, I think I mentioned this briefly earlier. There's the functional aspect of leadership, right? So it's conscious. There's a role of leadership that somebody is like, okay, it's my service, my job to lead, okay, to give direction, to give vision, to give facility, to create facility. But then there is also the aspect of inspiring others by example. When you leave a pot of milk to stand, the cream will rise to the top. So as our quality improves, especially in our Krishna consciousness, inevitably each of us, even without knowing it, is influencing someone. Everybody who watches us, because we walk past so many people a day, right? So encounter so many people a day, is consciously and subconsciously looking to us for an idea, inspiration, aspiration. And yes, whilst very few people, minority, have a leadership role. Okay? Because if most people were leaders and minimal were followers, it wouldn't make any sense. So actually most people are followers and very few people have a leadership role. Just bearing that in context, that yes, most of us don't have a leadership role. So in that sense, how do I take on this understanding that everyone's a leader? Well, because everybody is serving others. And so in the way that I am your servant, we are also following each other, just in different parameters. So this example, you know, what fragrance am I carrying? In the small ways that I'm authentic, or making sure that I'm divinely inspired in whatever service I do, we are allowing other people to have a piece of that vision. Because one of the amazing things that Srila Prabhupada has done with this third purpose, and I want to focus on this third purpose of bringing us together, bringing, what he says is bringing us closer to each other, closer to Krishna, and closer to everyone else in the pursuit of remembering that actually we're all ultimately connected to Krishna. That is the ultimate vision of a Krishna conscious leader, which might be a role, okay? But that is the ultimate vision also of every sadhaka, every Vaishnava, every aspiring Vaishnava, every devotee. So in that sense, we are all leaders because we're all holding that vision. So we are all channels to the degree that we hold that vision and emulate Srila Prabhupada's teachings and practices and being in achieving that vision. We are all leaders in that sense because someone is always connected to us.
Yes, I love that, how you're inspiring us to see that we are all serving, and that is the highest example, to do that service in a way that is inspiring to others, without jealousy and anger and all the things we see around in any relationships, whether it's with friends, family, colleagues. There's a lot of conflict often, can we instead communicate, collaborate? And that is a great example. So everyone, hope this has inspired you to be a leader in your arena for Krishna and to bring us closer to Krishna. I remember Prabhupada once was asked what will please you the most. And he said 4 words: if you love Krishna. So, and we help each other to always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Be an example of that and try to see, someone likes cooking, get them to cook for Krishna. That will help their remembrance. So you said this at the beginning, a leader draws out, from that individual, helps them set a vision. Thank you so much for giving us clarity, practical tools and tips, wonderful analogies. The mushroom was nice. I remember that's a new one. I pretty much know all your analogies. I've been learning from you for 17 years, but that's a new one. I haven't heard that one. You're full of new, fresh things. Like Krishna is, Nava Yovana. He's ever fresh, exciting, and I feel like you bring that, as a channel for us. Thank you so much. Everyone who's listening, please feel free to comment, on this conversation. Maybe share your vision. Maybe share a question, maybe share a takeaway here, and maybe just definitely take one thing from this conversation, just one thing that you can apply to change your life so that you can feel happier, healthier, more connected to people around you and growing in your Krishna consciousness. And then go tell someone about that. And ask them to, tell you and have this accountability. This is about building safer communities, empowering each other. And let's be grateful to our leaders, give them space as well. You shared that. There's so much, a wealth of what you've shared. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we hope we can keep having these conversations. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Tulsi Sundari. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama.